So you think that Pakistan gets closer scrutiny by the West, having lurched in and out of the military rule?
Of course, I must respond to this special statement which Ken has just given. I see India fomenting trouble in Sri Lanka, Tamils, of course, it's been gone and agreed. Say the case of Pakistan, I mean, within India, say the cases against the Sikhs, say the cases against the Kashmiris, they say cases against the Christians. That speaks of how the state terrorism is being fomented in India. So that is how you feel and perceive things. So definitely, but the problem is that how you compare with India and Pakistan. Both, I mean, India can get along because it is sort of having a clock of democracy. It can just go away because it is a democratic elected government. But nonetheless, if you see the Indian government of the current BJP is a hostage to the RSS, which is a Hindu fundamentalist regime. That means a few in India are trying to control the government in center.
By contrast, how do you see that the charge that the Muslim fundamentalists are raising their ugly head even in their own country?
Yes, definitely. That is a basic problem of perceptions. Of course, why this Muslim fundamentalism has risen in Pakistan, or for that matter, say in Afghanistan, who raised Taliban? I mean, just read the Mr. Rashid book. How the Taliban were raised, who are the instrumental in raising those Talibans. Tomorrow, yesterday's freedom fighters have become today's terrorists. That is a subject of analysis.
George, where do you come down on what he said? Do these the terrorists are not regarded appropriately, or do you think that Pakistan has a better form of government in a sense, that more tolerance for people than India seems to demonstrate?
Oh. It's hard for me to say. I'm not an expert on either subject. The fact that we've seen instances of India fomenting, or if the government is not fomenting, certainly tolerating religious intolerance towards minorities, arms of the government instituting unrest in neighboring states. I'm not sure I'd go so far as to call it a terrorist state. That's probably too strong a term. But it's certainly not a very democratic form of behavior. It's difficult to reconcile a democratic state with that kind of behavior towards its neighbors and towards its own internal minorities. So it's to be kind, a democracy in process, in evolution, in various stages of evolution. And I can probably say the same about Pakistan. It's maybe regressed because of the lack of elections. There may be certain democratic processes and procedures and behaviors within the country, but until the people are empowered sufficiently to choose their own representatives, then clearly it's not going to sit at the table of democracies in the Western world. But beyond that, I mean, I don't see the same kind of repression internally in Pakistan that we've seen, the tolerance or the acceptance of intolerance within India. So.
I mean, certainly in Karachi, where the migrants from India who speak Urdu have been subject to police repression for a long time, has been a big problem in Pakistan. And you go further back, Benazir Bhutto's father put down a rebellion by the Balochs. I mean, both states have had their challenges with trying to retain a unified state, given their ethnic and cultural pluralities within their borders. And both states have been given to using a heavy repressive hand to control those minorities. And this, quite frankly, is a legacy of British colonial rule, because that's the way the British did things.
Can I respond to this question, please, for a while, very briefly? I mean, especially in terms of comparing India and Pakistan, very rightly he has said that we find no cases of intolerance vis-a-vis the minorities in Pakistan, say for instance against the Christians, say against the Sikhs or so many other Hindus living inside Sindh. Especially in terms of the Ken he mentioned, especially in Karachi and Balochistan, that was especially in terms of subjective analysis of a minority, not in terms of a religious minority, but minority within the Muslim minority who wanted to do something. So that was totally a different case. That in terms of, that is political. In terms of that,
There's
you
religious
try
problems
to
too.
say the political hierarchy or the political manipulation of the certain regime. I mean, if we go back into history, how these trouble was created in Sindh, how these trouble were created in, I mean, people still blame in Pakistan that these trouble in Sindh was because of the Indians. So,
I mean, the Pakistan Constitution says a Christian, a Hindu, a Jain, a Sikh, none of them can become prime minister. None of them can sit in parliament except for the seats reserved for religious minorities. I mean, Pakistan also has its problems with religious minorities, and there have been repressive episodes with Christians. And the Christians, by and large, have been attached to Benazir Bhutto's party because they fear the other party. I mean, both states have had these kind of difficulties.
Let's move away from this for a moment and talk about, do you think countries like India, Pakistan, Peru, they deliberately focus on evading the reality rather than confronting their real issues? For example, India was too eager to build a case for Indo-US Joint Commission on Counterterrorism rather than confronting some of its own problems.
Well, India has taken its own approach to these questions, and it's not always been successful either.
Let me tell you about 1984, and I am, as everyone well knows, considered something of an India basher. I've told people that it depends on where you lived in India and when. I first lived in Punjab in 1980-81. I was teaching at Chandigarh at the Punjab University on a Fulbright fellowship. And at that time, I got to know quite a bit about Amritsar, about Sikhs, and about Punjab in general. In 1984, I went to Southeast Asia as a correspondent. And I was based in Bangkok, but I kept coming back. And in fact, I was in China when Mrs. Gandhi was shot. I was not there for the attack on the Golden Temple in Amritsar early in '84, but I came back for Mrs. Gandhi's funeral and for her death. In other words, I flew back the day she was shot. And I saw with my own eyes what happened in Delhi. I went across the Trans-Yamuna colonies, and I saw people who had been set on fire alive and were just left as charred remains. I saw sandals where there had been people, and I saw at Delhi Station, Old Delhi Station, Sikhs with their heads scalped, lying dead on trains. And I thought that no one would ever see what looked like a small picture of partition repeated again. And I know that for those 3 days, it seemed that no one was in charge of Delhi. And the massacres that took place all over town. When I was writing a little book about India when I came back some years later, by chance that week that I was finishing the chapter on that I remembered from '84, the Chilean Reconciliation Report came out. And I realized that in those 3 or 4 days in Delhi, more Sikhs were killed than all the Chileans who died or disappeared in 18 years under Pinochet. Now, the interesting thing is that no official in India has ever paid that price. And so when people say to me, why are you so gratuitously critical, that's the first example I use. That, in fact, Mr. Narasimha Rao, who was then Home Minister and therefore in charge of law and order, went on to become Prime Minister. And there are many other people, we all know them in government, who have really never been brought to task.